Hello class, Dr. Nemecek here again. Welcome to week one of Strategic Management of Healthcare Organizations. We're going to be looking at week one in the textbook, of course, that I showed you in my welcome announcement, Strategic Management of Healthcare Organizations, 7th edition by Ginter, Duncan, and Swain. This is a pretty good textbook by comparison to a lot of graduate level textbooks that I've seen on this subject. And what you need to know about chapter one is that the authors want you to be aware of 10 learning objectives that they feel for takeaway information for you for this course. Those are explained, and you can find these on page 3 in chapter 1 of your textbook. You should be able to explain why health strategic management has become crucial in today's dynamic healthcare environment. 2, trace the evolution of strategic management and discuss its conceptual foundations. 3, be able to describe and explain the concept of strategic thinking maps. 4, define and differentiate between strategic management, strategic thinking, strategic planning, and managing strategic momentum. So pay attention that there are 4 different items there that you must be able to define and differentiate. 5, be able to understand the necessity for both the analytic and emergent models of strategic management. 6, understand how an organization may realize a strategy that it never intended. 7, understand the benefits of strategic management for healthcare organizations. 8, understand the importance of systems approaches. 9, explain the different links between the different levels of strategy within an organization. And 10, describe the various leadership roles of strategic management. So let's take a look at one of the things that I think that will help you to hone in on that type of information. And in your textbook, the authors talk about change, and change being the only constant that there is that will make you aware of the fact that when you are working in strategic management and thinking about how you're going to be doing things on a day-to-day basis, you've got to remember and keep in mind that things are always changing. And with that in mind, you can develop a strategic plan that you put on paper now, and it may be different 6 weeks from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. So you've got to be aware of things like legislative health care reform, increasing restrictive reimbursement environments, demographic shifts wherever your population shifts, the impact that baby boomers and their retirement has in your organization. Something that you always have to deal with is shortage of healthcare providers. The high costs of investment for investing in new technology, computerization of your organization, and consolidation that's always taking place within the healthcare industry. You've got to be aware of that for sure. And be aware of things like growth of your outpatient care facilities, home health agencies, and changes in managed care strategies. And last but not least, make sure that you're aware that there is, in today's environment, an increase in physicians and executive leadership positions, which may thrust some different changes upon you as well. And that there, right today, based on what's happening in healthcare across the United States, there seems to be an emergency focus on prevention of things as opposed to putting out fires. And last but not least, pressure to reduce overhead costs. And of course, if you've been working in healthcare and you've been studying healthcare, you know that costs is a major problem that we all have to be aware of. So the authors also want you to make sure that you are aware of development of strategic management. And again, the 4 things that I talked about in one of those objectives. Make sure you're studying this chapter about long-range planning versus strategic planning versus strategic management versus strategic management in the healthcare industry. They all have to do with strategic management. They have a different take, though, based on what the definition is for each one of those terms. Make sure you study a little bit in this chapter also about health policy and the impacts that has makes on your organization based on a national type of approach. Be able to understand that health policy determines the rules that apply to all consumers and providers. So we've got to be acutely aware of what the federal government is doing relative to establishing health policy. Health policy also mandates that we develop and maintain an infrastructure in our organizations to efficiently enhance the health of the public. We must be able to define the institutions that meet the preferences of most of society. We must be able to develop the rules under which insurers and providers compete. And last but not least, make sure that you are aware that health policy is set by Congress, state legislatures, executive branches, and agencies such as your local health departments, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the Food and Drug Administration, and so on and so forth. So make sure that you spend some time reading about that in this chapter. Your authors are also going to refer to and have you read a little bit about the dimensions of strategic management. And again, this is going back to defining and making a difference relative to the 4 different terms that they talk about, but pertinent to this course, since we're talking about strategic management in healthcare, they want you to know that strategic management is a way of thinking, or in other words, an approach for managing complex organizations. They go on to tell you that strategic thinkers draw upon the past, understand the present, and can envision a better future. But as opposed to people who are planners, on the other hand, these are the people who will figure out how to get where the strategic thinkers envision that we need to go in the future. So keep that in mind as you study through this chapter and through the course. They also are going to introduce you to what they refer to as the map and the compass. And when you refer to the map and the compass in strategic planning, the map is described as something that is analytical and a rational approach to what it is that you're going to do. It comprises a logical sequence of steps. It is a specific process that is laid down on paper for you to follow. And it's something that the entire world is better off knowing, being that the fact that if you're using a map and thinking about a road map that you can actually pull out of the glove box in your car and look at it, you've got something there that you can actually follow that's got streets on it and mileage and places. And this helps you to take an analytical approach or a rational approach to what it is to establish strategic thinking within your organization. And they compare that to what they call the compass, which is a process that some people are using these days, which is emerging in today's healthcare management boardrooms. And essentially the compass relies on learning from your mistakes, and the leadership in the organization sets direction for where everybody's going to go. And sometimes this is good for uncharted territory, and kind of guessing as to where we're going to be going in the future, as opposed to knowing where we are now, where we think the future already is, and it's pretty certain that we know where it's going to go. So read about the map and the compass and that concept that the authors want you to become familiar with. They'll give you examples to look at and some very effective diagrams that talk about the map and the compass. And they'll relate that to the strategic management processes, of which they will show you some charts where they will have a column that talks about strategic thinking, another one that talks about strategic planning, and another one that talks about managing strategic momentum. Now, in the column that talks about strategic thinking, they're going to ask you to think about external orientations. In other words, what are people outside the organization think about your organization, what's happening out there that's going to have a direct impact on your strategic management planning. Your strategic thinking should include analyzing data that's available for you to help make decisions. You will be asking questions and making assumptions about things that maybe you don't quite have answers to, but that will help you to generate new ideas, which eventually will move you into the column of strategic planning, which you're going to develop a situation analysis, strategic formulation, and planning the implementation of the things that you put on paper. And last but not least, you'll then take that information to managing the strategic momentum of the organization. And they're going to talk about managerial actions that you're going to take, strategy evaluation of the things that you've put on paper, emergent learning and how the organization becomes a learning organization and learns from the things that you're experiencing as part of the strategic management process. And the whole thing comes full circle where you're going to then reinitiate strategic thinking and go back to the beginning of the cycle again and start all over again so you can stay on top of what's happening in the future in your organization. So it's kind of like a never-ending process, kind of like a dog chasing its tail around in circles, because it never stays stagnant. You always want to be moving forward. So again, leading strategically, they want you to understand these definitions. Strategic thinking is an intellectual orientation, a way of thinking or a mindset. versus strategic planning, which is the periodic process of creating organizational momentum, a strategy itself. And then last but not least, managing strategic momentum. This is where a philosophy and process of continuing leading and managing an organization using strategic thinking and periodic strategic planning is what you're going to be following. So that is what they term as leading strategically. And then they're going to have examples of that in chart format also. Have it laid out in the 3 different columns again, where we have strategic activity, a description of what that might be, and an orientation and scope. For example, strategic thinking activity might be described as something that is a fundamental strategic skill. In other words, an intellectual orientation, a way of thinking or mindset. And again, the orientation and scope that you adopt is that as an individual, this is an individual leadership process that you're going to take upon yourself to help develop strategic management planning in your organization. And then it goes through the same things for strategic planning and managing strategic momentum. So make sure that you spend some time going through the definition again for thinking, planning, and momentum, and strategic benefits of strategic management. Relative to the benefits of strategic management, this whole thing really is based on the fact that what you're trying to do for your organization ties the organization together with a common sense of purpose and shared values. It's supposed to help you improve financial performance in many cases throughout the organization. It should provide the organization with a clear self-concept, specific goals and guidance, as well as consistency in decision making. It should help managers understand the present, think about the future, and recognize the signals that suggest change. And it will require managers to communicate both vertically and horizontally. But one of the things that you need to be aware of is that there are quite a few things that strategic management is not. And they will close up this chapter by telling you that strategic management is not a quick fix to your problems. It's not a technique or a gimmick. It's not just a yearly planning retreat where you get together once a year and then never look at it again. It's not paper intensive. It's really more intuitive intensive, where people are thinking about things as opposed to just generating a bunch of paper and doing nothing with it. It is not a regulatory document. In other words, if you put something on paper, it doesn't mean that you have to stick with it just because you put it on paper. In fact, just the opposite. You should be able to turn on a dime and make changes to those documents that develop as part of the strategic planning process. So therefore, it's not going to regulate what you do. And it's not really being done in compliance with any regulatory requirements that are thrust upon us either. It is not just an extension of last year's plan. It should be something entirely new, or at least modified in that vein. And it's not just based on forecasts of current operations. So in conclusion to Chapter 1, make sure that you take a look at what strategic management is not. So they're also going to close up this chapter by having you look at key terms that are going to be important to understanding what this chapter is all about. It starts out with terms that deal with analytical and rational approach, and it finishes with an unrealized strategy and everything that's in between. And you'll see that chart listed for you in Chapter 1. So spend some time with that. So again, Chapter 1 is very effective in helping you to kind of open your eyes up to the perspective of what the nature of strategic management in healthcare is all about, and gives you an introductory to the subject. You probably had strategic management classes or introduction to this type of information before, but remember that this course is specific to the healthcare organization, and it's looked at from the perspective of you being at a position of senior level management where you now have achieved that level of management yourself, and you're going to be participating in the process of being one of the leaders that is going to make this work for your organization. And that's one of the reasons why you're taking this course. It's very important for the organization to be able to flourish and move into the 21st century further on down the road, based on the fact that we know that change is going to be imminent, and we know that we've got to keep up with the times. And to be able to do that, we have to understand how we can strategically manage our healthcare organization by establishing strategic management plans and doing such the things we put on paper that we decide are good for the organization. So if you have any questions about that after you work on this week's information, send me an email or you can call me directly. Remember what my office hours, and try to keep your communication with me to, if you call by telephone, within 9 to 3 Monday through Friday. If you have to talk to me after hours, send me an email. We'll set up an appointment to do so. So good luck with this week's information, and if I don't hear from any of this week, I'll be looking forward to your discussion board participation and the work that you submit at the end of the week. And then we'll be moving on to week 2 next week, Thursday. Thanks for your attention. Bye.